between January and May of this year was the fastest home price appreciation in Canadian history. Mortgage borrowing for Q1 of this year was the lowest in 2 decades. And now we're here midway through June and we're getting May's numbers. So there was this steep incline for January to May. But if new people aren't entering the market with as much gusto and with as much buying power, this is going to crescent here. And that crescent is probably going to be seen here in June and July.
When I was broke, I had rich habits. When I was broke, I had rich habits.
All right, back again. I don't know, when are we going to drop this episode, actually? We're going to drop it Thursday. Yeah, sorry for the missed Monday episode. Bunch of crazy things. You know, Neal, you were traveling. Father's Day was in there. I had a bout of some stomach issue. So we were out of commission, but let's dive right back into it. Neal, how you doing?
Good, not too bad. Yeah, I'll also add to, everyone already knows, but I live outside the city now, and I'm being difficult about coming into town. So I think we might do more of these where we get a mic set up at my house and make it happen. But
big rural guy.
Anyways, yeah, big rural guy. I like it out here in the sticks.
Is that a John Deere hat you're wearing?
Sticks. This is not a John Deere hat. This is an unmarked hat.
So I actually, for the very first time, you've been out there for how long? How long have you been out there?
6 months. 6 months.
6 months. And I would consider us good friends. I have not ever been to your house. The other day, I finally drove out there because I had showings out there, and it's literally a dirt road to your house.
Yeah. Did you get all the way to the end?
I can't believe I went to the T intersection and I saw your house and I turned right back around and drove out of there.
Yeah,
it's rough.
Yeah, I mean,
it's rough going there. I don't know how you drive that nice Audi through there, but
first of all, everyone makes it out that this is like the end of the world. This is such a Nova Scotia thing where I'm 20 to 25 minutes from our office. You're downtown. You're in the heart of downtown, so I'm 30 minutes. No, man, I drive home and it'll be like 19 minutes. If there's no traffic, it's 19 minutes. With traffic, it's like 26. And then this part also blows my mind is that like there are dirt roads on here because like this is a lakefront street. All the lakefront streets here are dirt roads, and I'm like, the average house price is probably double the province's average.
I also passed a literal log cabin, and I don't mean like, oh, what a beautiful log cabin design mansion. It's like, no, it's like a Unabomber log cabin on the way.
That wasn't on the lake.
No, not at all. No, I'm just saying like the general setting is
ominous. I want to cross the street from that. Yeah, I know. When I go running at nighttime, it's sketchy.
No, it looks lovely, and there's a lot of beautiful homes there as well. But it's just like, damn, man, I finally got out there.
The one across the street from the log cabin that you saw, it's another log cabin. It's nothing crazy, but they used it to film some a movie, and I don't know if it was a scary movie or not. Because it looked kind of like that. The way it's tucked in the trees, it could make a really good horror film setting. But anyways,
that explains like this is Halifax real estate. You drive 30 minutes in any direction, and you get pretty rural pretty quickly.
Which is craziness.
So, it's super cool.
Freaking out about affordability, but this is kind of...
Well, man, let's...
something people might have to get used to.
Yeah, and I got some cool stuff on that today. I think you've got some stuff as well, but I'm going to dive into something here, and I want to get your thoughts on. I'm going to throw 2 dramatically different perspectives at you with respect to the market, or 2 insights, because this is the challenge. This is what we're trying to balance. We being agents, people concerned about the market, interested in the market, people trying to buy, people trying to sell. You get all this conflicting information. We'll try this on for size.
Okay.
So between January and May of this year was the fastest home price appreciation in Canadian history. Between January and May of this year.
Based on what data? Whoa.
The relative ramp up.
Really?
What's that? Federal. This is nationally. And so what that means is it's effectively that's the recovery from, how we had the dip in Q4 of last year. Well, the start of this year, prices have ramped up at the fastest rate in a 5-year to start the year. That January to May, that's the fastest pace of price growth. Not necessarily the highest prices, but the fastest pace of growth for the first 5 months of a year. Additionally, The period between February and May was the second fastest 4-month period in history, second only to the peak COVID run-up that was June to September of 2020. So we're talking about speed of price increasing over a 4-month period. This is the second fastest. So there's your recovery that we've seen in the first quarter and 2 quarters of this year. That's not saying that prices have met what they were this time last year, because they haven't quite in most areas. However, it's been a very steep recovery. So that's perspective number one. Fast, like historically fast price growth.
Yeah.
Perspective two, mortgage borrowing for Q1 of this year was the lowest in 2 decades. So this is new money. This is people going out and getting mortgages or refinancing or borrowing in general. I shouldn't say mortgage borrowing. This is any sort of debt taking on, new debt taken on by Canadians in Q1 was the lowest it's been in 2 decades. For context, in 2022, the big spending, that big run up, Q1.
Pause. You said this is the lowest amount of debt taken on for this?
Yes.
So it's like actual cash.
This is the lowest amount of new money people are taking on, like going into the bank and say, hey, give me more money. Give me money.
Well, is that defined by dollar amount or by ratios? Like
by dollar amount. By dollar amount. So here, let me give you the numbers. In 2022, in Q1, there was $58 billion of new borrowing done by Canadians out there. Money was cheap. They were trying to get into the real estate. They were refinancing homes at low rates, all of these things. $58 billion in Q1 of 2022. In Q1 of 2023, $11.2 billion. So this makes sense because it means Canadians aren't refinancing their homes because rates are up. It means they're
$11 billion?
$11.2 billion. So from $58 billion down to $11.2 billion. Specifically, I think it was Equifax said that new mortgages were down 42% over that period. So obviously, no one's doing refinances Q1 of this year if they can help it, right? No one's doing refinance. Some people might be locking into fixed terms, but they're not doing new mortgages in Q1. They're not doing new products on their existing home. They're also not getting approved for new mortgages. And the reason is, one, they can't afford to. And two, the amount that they can get qualified for is going down and down and down. So you're seeing a 42% drop in new mortgage funds. And I saw someone anecdotally comment that mortgage broker income was down about 50% year to date because they get paid obviously based on the amount that you get. So on the one hand, you've got this rising price market, historically fast, that is suggesting a market that is just going to continue to ramp. But then you can see people are not going out and borrowing as much money, not nearly as much money, which suggests buyer demand is going to start to drop off. And if buyer demand drops off, buyer's ability to purchase drops off, the prices are going to have to roll over here. What do you think? I threw a lot at you there.
Yeah, you threw a lot there. So just pause for one quick sec here. So basically saying that house prices are going through the roof, but no one's taking any debt to do it. So there's a shit ton of people buying with a lot more cash.
Well, there's an element of that, but I think also.
Or do you mean that there's just a ton of volume, like it's a huge reduction in volume?
I think there's definitely a reduction in purchases, even though prices are rising. I think it's also people have gone out and the people got their mortgages in maybe, December and January, and then they went out and they purchased in March, April, May, but now no one new has been going out and getting these mortgages, right? So it's a lagging effect here. At some point, it seems to suggest that these prices and this demand is going to roll over.
Understood. Okay, but I guess the reason I'm like kind of baffled right now is that's an 80% drop in new mortgages. 80%.
New borrowing, I should clarify. That's new borrowing, not mortgages. But yeah.
But do those new... Yeah, well, so new borrowing, that probably includes refis.
That includes refis. That includes adding, HELOC products. That includes getting line of credits. A significant...
Even if that's half of that, we're still cutting by if you cut this in half to $29 billion, we're still down 60%.
Yeah.
On mortgages, which I don't understand because then how is the market running up?
Yeah,
other than
Equifax said
inventory being super low.
42% mortgages were down. New mortgages were down 42%. Yeah, what we're seeing is okay.
Mortgages are down 42%.
When there was that blip of stabilized, slightly low rates, and when Bank of Canada said, okay, we're going to pause rate increases, the market rebounded pretty strongly. People went out and bought. We're still seeing those deals closing now, right? Because say someone bought in April, it only closed in May. If they bought in March, it might have only closed in May. And now we're here midway through June and we're getting May's numbers. So there was this steep incline again, a historically steep incline for January to May. But if new people aren't entering the market with as much gusto and with as much buying power, this is going to crescent here. And that crescent is probably going to be seen here in June and July. Again, these are national numbers. But if you want to predict, what's that?
Shouldn't it already have crescendoed based on the numbers that you're saying? Like, if there's no if there's no new mortgages going out in Q1, like, wouldn't that have already caused a crescendo?
Well, you're talking about
that's like a direct impact.
Well, you have a 120-day rate hold, right? So I think they would.
This number, this 11 billion and 58 billion, aren't based on rate holds. You're not saying there's 11 billion dollars of money that's been rate holded.
But I'm just saying, people would have say gotten a rate hold in November, December, January, and then purchased in February, March, April. But then the people that went out after that, say in March, April, May, they did not take on nearly as much mortgage, and there's not as many buyers entering the market that'll presumably be closing in June, July, August.
Totally understood, but I guess more my concept is, forget about the rates for a second. It doesn't matter what the rate was. Just simply looking at the volume of the mortgage.
Yeah.
If there's only $11 billion of mortgages going out in Q1, that means there were like no deals. That being said, Q1 of this year was silence. The market only started. I know that the skip-hole stats that you opened with were that Q1 or tilted from the start of this year to today. This is how much growth we've had. None of that growth was had in March, February.
No, it's a good point.
January, February, definitely none. March, maybe, but really the market turned back on in April. So I think that's probably why. I think 2023 Q2 versus 2022 Q2 might show a more accurate picture potentially.
That's a good point, because also there was a little bit of a dip in the fixed rates in April and May. So those people who took those fixed rates are now shopping. That's why the market's been hot, because those people are now shopping. I'm just saying, if we're trying to predict the Q3, Q4, and now that we have more rate increases, fixed rates are up high again, there is this lag of whatever the rate hold is. The rate hold's 120 days. So all you need to do really is look at when was the last cheapest money, which I think there was a little dip in the 5-year fixeds in May. So we've got May to June, June to July, July to August. August to September will be kind of the last period that people will have had that round of cheaper money. So it's just all very conflicting information, because the prices are going up like this, but less people are getting mortgages and are getting approved for less amount. You have to think there's going to be some sort of balance struck between those two. It's why I feel now that this run-up that we're at right now is the latest crescendo, and we're going to have some petering after this for a little bit. I don't think we're going to have a big pullback in our local market.
It's a secondary bear run. I think, we talked about it before. The pullbacks, I think, will be when properties aren't good as a whole. But if you have a good property, I don't think you're going to lose a ton of value. And I think time to sale might slow down, or will slow down. You're already seeing it. Non-preferred properties are very sought after locations are taking a lot longer to sell. But I'm just kind of going with this in my head. The last thing I just want to add is I don't know that it's going to be rate holds that define the market. I think it's honestly more sentiment.
Oh, 100%.
I don't think a lot of people recognize what their rate hold is, or that they even know they have one. I think a lot of people are just like hearing the news, or they hear a rate hike and then like, oh, I'm out, or I'm not taking more money, or I'm not doing anything because it's bad. Because just like I think that's what was going on at the start of this year, post Christmas. Everyone was just like, bad news. We just come off a huge ramp.
Yep.
And people are like, well, it's not so bad. I mean, and then long-term rates came down a little bit.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people don't.
Now sentiment's crap again.
Yeah, people don't understand the rate market at all. Like when that most recent Bank of Canada rate increase came down, people are like, oh, well, that'll probably slow the market again. Like, well, no one that's going out and getting approved for a mortgage right now is taking a variable rate. No one is. They're all taking fixed right now. So it has no effect on the immediate buying power of those people for the most part, at least, strictly in a vacuum to their mortgage. But most people don't understand that, but they hear the news, they hear it's bad, and they assume the worst. What it really hurts is people who already have the home. And we've said before, the people bearing the brunt of this are people who have purchased in the last 3 years, right? Like they're the ones bearing the brunt of what I think was bad federal policy. But yeah, just very interesting. And then add to that, sales were up 70%, or sales were up in 70% of the markets in May. Prices were up 5.1% from April to May. So we've got this run on pricing that we're having. But then you look at a market like Toronto, where now new listings are outpacing sales, which is a relatively unique or new phenomenon in the last few years. So you have a slowly growing inventory of properties in some markets. And when you think of what an important driving market Toronto is, in terms of headlines, in terms of national average, in terms of driving that sentiment and narrative that you're talking about, they have this growing supply of houses, which is outpacing sales for the first time in a while. That indicates that there could be another correction coming for that market.
So, well, yeah, okay. So a couple things to that. And there's a couple things I want to add overall. But the Toronto market, I was trying to pull up an article that I read last week. But yeah, here it is. Actually, it's from Better Dwelling. We call them on a lot. But it's Canadian largest real estate market saw supply outpace population. So both Toronto and Vancouver actually saw more units being built than their population grew.
Okay.
Which is kind of scary because I mean that's something that we've always talked about. Oh, like there's no supply, there's no supply, no supply. But they built. Let's see here. They had 84,500 people move in, and they built 61,320 properties. And you're obviously like, oh, that's a smaller number, but the average property houses, I think it's 1.6 or 1.8 people.
Right.
So when you look at it like that, they're actually outpacing population growth with adding more units, which is good in some sense because Toronto and Vancouver's in a similar boat, a slightly less dramatic difference in numbers. It's pretty close. Let's see here. It was housing stock grew 28,000 homes with its population climbing 55,000 people. That's with an average of 2 people per home. They're just beating that number. But it's good. I mean, it's something that we need, right? Eventually, that market does need to cool a bit because the pricing's gone out of this world.
So you're saying in Toronto and Vancouver,
considerate of.
In Toronto and Vancouver, new units are outpacing the population growth in those markets.
Yes, and again, not on a direct number comparison. It's on the basis that the average property holds like 1.8 to 2 people.
Right.
But it is definitely something to consider because especially the average property there definitely holds at least 2 people. When you consider there's probably units that are holding a lot more than that because people are trying to share their costs. Or when you're buying a condo, there's not many single income earners in those cities that are purchasing condos on their own. But anyways, I just saying that because you mentioned that you see potential correction for those markets.
Do you ever?
I agree.
Do you ever go down the rabbit hole of these arguments that Canada doesn't actually have a housing supply problem? I know you and I have talked about this before, and you talk about like, oh, there's all these vacant units, blah 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 blah.
I'm in for a good conspiracy, and I've done on some different ones. Yeah, let me hear what you guys say. What you're thinking.
Well, this just reminded me of an argument you and I had one time, and you're like, "There's all these vacant, empty units in BC. Like, there's actually enough houses to house everyone. It's all just manufactured." And we posted that clip of those 2 homes, basically across Niagara Falls from one another. Niagara Falls, Canada, like 650,000. Niagara Falls in the States, 150 or whatever it was, and it got a lot of flack or traction. People were riled up about it for sure. And it's so weird because our cost of construction supports the prices in a lot of cases. And maybe that's problematic in itself of how expensive it is to build the homes. But there does always seem to be this disconnect mainly in secondary markets where it's hard to understand the pricing sometimes relative to our income, relative to the number of people in some of these areas where, man, like the houses do seem expensive. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know where I'm going
Let
with
me
this, but
comment. I wasn't. I will say I know what you're talking about now. I remember back. It wasn't that I felt that there was so many empty properties that just everybody would get housing overnight, but I did consider the fact that there is a bigger percentage of empty homes than I think we recognize. Um, there is a ton of secondary properties, and then there's also a ton of Airbnbs. And my logic kind of was with a slower market, if that volume starts coming onto market at any sort of pace, like if you look at it on a monthly scale, let's say our market's short 150 houses. If you then take all of those and make them non-viable for whoever owns them and they want to sell them now, and for that month an extra 150 listing comes on, now we've matched what the market needed.
mhm.
The next month, if that happens again, it only takes 60 to 90 days of a certain type of market for everyone's mindset to change, right?
Yeah.
In 90 days, if you had 3 months where the listing volume actually matched the buying volume, this crazy fire is going to get put out, right? It's going to slow down, and then you have the mindset change that follows that, where people are like, "Oh crap!" It's similar to what's happening right now. We had the same deal where there's a bit of this crunch on inventory, and now we've had 2 3 months of just like this massive run up.
Mhm.
But a lot of things are pointing to it going down, and
Yeah.
everyone knows that, but they're still going out there and bidding and being aggressive. And again, it's more mindset than I think actually following numbers and things like that. So that was always
Yeah.
my concept with that. The other thing I want to add to what you just said, which is construction prices seem to um, match kind of what we're selling things for, what things are being rented for, etc. Which I do agree with in some capacity. But there's also the aspect that, like, if, for example, and this is already what I see happening, but whatever any benefit they put out, all of that happens is everything else gets more expensive. And what I mean by that is, let's say Canadian government comes out with a $25,000 incentive to build units. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? Probably of that 25,000, a good portion of it is just going to go into land value. So if land was trading for $100,000 a unit, and now they put out this $25,000
Yeah.
credit,
Yeah.
the land value is going to go up to 125,
Yeah. Well, this is the problem with the
right?
whole idea of like, oh, let's just let government solve it. They're going to take our tax dollars and then they're going to spit it back out to us and try to make it seem like it was efficient, but it's the exact opposite, right? Like that money
The
comes from somewhere. That money comes from taxpayers, and then it gets bureaucratized, gets turned into 20 cents on the dollar, and then it gets given back to someone. And this is the whole thing with, like, I don't know if we want to get into this carbon taxing thing. A lot of people have been asking us about that, but it's the same sort of model. It's like, oh, no, it'll be fine. Like, you're just going to pay way more at the pump and way more for your home heating, and all of the expenses of carbon tax are going to be passed on to you with the things you buy at the store, blah, blah. But then don't worry, we're going to send you a check in the mail for $170 and it'll all be fine. It's like, wait, what? What are we doing? It makes no sense to me.
cost on bananas.
Yeah, this is we have this over reliance on government, and it is so frustrating. And then Canadians wonder why there's so many problems, and they complain about stuff, and then they just continue to repeat the cycle. I think I've said it before. If you are voting for the status quo in any of your upcoming situations, like, I think there's something seriously wrong with you. But we're all
I agree,
in it, and
but-
you know what? The person's going to get that check in the mail and be like, "Yeah, thank you, government, for this check." It's like, you bozo. Like, that is your own money, and it's only a fraction of your own money that they are giving back to you, and now you are happy about it. I don't understand what we are doing.
I
It's
think a lot
very
of people are
frustrating.
pointing frustration with it. But again, like I said, I want to, like, focusing on the housing thing. I think I'm gonna, after having said what I just said, which is like anything the government gives out as an incentive is going to get gobbled up by someone along the chain, whether it's the builder.
Yeah.
If it's a building incentive, the builder will soak it up. If it's something that directly benefits the land values or the financing, the person who is the land developer or owns the land will end up winning off of that. But like, I'm not going to give a problem without what I think there could be a potential solution to, which is, I think there's two options, which is government giving out land, like taking excess surplus land and giving it to someone to build, and then putting mandates against that, like being like, you need to match these units to this costing, or and you need to build within a certain time frame, and pushing a bunch of density in that direction,
Hmm.
not just giving a ton of surplus land to developers that they can slowly build out over 20 years. It's like these need
Yeah.
to be built within the next 12 months. This needs to break ground and get started. And what was I going to say? What was the other thing?
Well, but here's the thing. You know, you and I are both very free market capitalism to
Yeah.
large degree. And then you say stuff like, all right, the government's going to handle real estate development and blah blah. And this is the problem. We try to have it both ways. Like we are, capitalist in some respects, socialist in other respects. And by not committing to one or the other, this is where we run into problems. Because if we had a
Yeah.
truly free market that wasn't buoyed up and reliant on, government subsidies and HST rebates and all these things, maybe I think we wouldn't have these problems to begin with. Because at the end of the day, if the government starts saying, oh, we have these programs here and there, people are just going to find a way to grease those programs to over profit on them effectively. And
Yeah.
the challenge with that is then you create these false markets, and you can look at that as the capitalist system abusing the government regulations, or you can just look at it as business being business. Whereas if you just made the builders go out there and have to figure it out on their own, I think ultimately the market would sort it out. And I just think a lot of these half measures that we take, the profiteering nature of business is that they're like, okay, cool. So I can get that money from the government and still charge this amount over here. Absolutely, I'm going to do that. And whether that's
I think we're in that market though, where builders are out there kind of figuring it out on their own, and it's gotten to a costing of like the only way to make money is to do high end luxury stuff, and so that's the only thing that ever gets built, right? And so which is fine, but then it's not allowing there to be like it's not being built at a pace that can keep the affordable housing affordable.
yeah,
And so something kind of has to give. Like there needs to be some sort of incentive to do it, but it has to be done in a way where it doesn't just get gobbled up by someone else making money, and it has to be
yeah,
like large enough that it can actually have that much impact. And I think that's another aspect of it is they do little dribs, and it's like that's not big enough.
yeah.
You need to rezone 1,000 acres and be like, there's 50 or 100 lots in here, and you need to completely flood the market.
Like I am
Um,
staring directly across here to downtown Dartmouth, right? Like we're in
Sort of.
downtown Halifax. This is downtown Dartmouth, and I'm looking.
Waterfront Dartmouth.
Yeah, I'm looking across here, and see all that green space there, right?
Yeah.
Right by the ferry terminal. Like we're talking, I don't know, if I were to estimate that, I would say between Cove, right? And this is very specific to our area, so people may be bored about this, but I would love to show people a picture of this. Between like the Cove, the industrial, actual shipping Coast Guard part of downtown Dartmouth, and the Woodside Ferry Terminal, I see literally, I don't know, 1,000 acres of green space. Some of it around the NSCC. Why, they would put a university right on the waterfront, I don't quite know. And then a bunch around, I think that's, the Dartmouth General and stuff. We're talking thousands of acres of just green space in a city that has a housing problem. And so why isn't that all just getting massively developed with units? I don't know.
Agree. On the flip side, I also agree. Like, if a city gets big enough, it's great when they have these green spaces within the city space. But it's easy for them to get chewed up. So that I'm back and forth. I'm like, do we need all the housing to be right in the middle of downtown? Like,
No, not at all. But
we have a ferry transit system.
those
If
aren't
you go a
parks,
little
dude.
further out. No, but so that's my other problem is there's nothing being done with them. That's the only reason I'm like, I agree with what you're saying. But then you go to another big city that has these green spaces, they're heavily utilized as parks and spaces that you can do things. For us, it's like literally just a ton of bushes. There is one little okay path that rips along there, but our waterfronts need to be maximized. But yeah, I was thinking like surplus lands in places that aren't necessarily super high level, like in like that's a very nice area that I think it's kind of cool that they're keeping it green space. I do think it's ridiculous that the entire Dartmouth waterfront has effectively no property, like no residential property. The school on the water can be kind of nice. So at the end of the day, school's always pretty bland and the locations usually suck, and you're in like a middle of a suburb or surrounded by a city. So it's kind of cool that they're on that giant green space.
Yeah, I don't know. I just
think-
do we need to put the community college on like 100 acres of waterfront green park land? Like it just
I know what you
noticeably
mean.
stands out. And again, that's not park space that anyone has public access to. It's just like wasted green space in the downtown of a city that apparently is really struggling with housing. But
Yeah, I mean, it is a public space in the sense that the park's a public space, and
no,
the
man, like
building is gonna be a bit
I
more
live over there. I've
accessible.
never been to any of these green spaces.
No. Behind the community college. Behind the community college, I think the community college kind of makes sense because look, if you develop that whole waterfront, it's going to be so damn expensive that the average person is not going to actually be able to access it.
Yeah.
Right? This
Anyway,
is like the Halifax
yeah,
waterfront. The Halifax waterfront is so freaking expensive, and any waterfront in any city is so expensive that you're basically then pushing everybody out. So I think keeping like something like an NSCC or something down there, if it's done well, which that building was, it's a beautiful building, and they did a nice big park on the backside. I think that's a good opportunity. The other space, I agree with you to an extent, but I'm also like, let's keep it, but make it an awesome park. And then there's a ferry terminal right there, and there's a ton of land on the other side of the water. There's tons of space there to build
yeah.
massive, massive buildings, and there's tons of underutilized space. Even like the neighborhood of Woodside is so low on density. And further in, as you go further into town too, like I think they need to maximize. But we should be having, as a waterfront city, we should be having like a park line that goes all the way along. Like you should have from downtown Halifax all the way around to Bedford Basin and down back into the front of Dartmouth without ever leaving like a beautiful bicycle path.
Yeah, and we're kind of getting nuance into our local market here. I guess the point I'm making is I think there's just more flat out that we can do for development. But the article you're referencing in Better Dwelling, which people should check out because I brought it up here in my phone, it's a really, really interesting article. Did you read it to the end?
Which one?
The Better Dwelling article that talks about how how new construction in Toronto and Vancouver is outpacing population growth. So in fact, we may not actually have a shortage of housing that we think we do. That article is phenomenal. People should check it out. Did you read to the end of it?
I didn't read the whole thing, no.
So they basically go on to, I don't know if allege is the word, that the federal government is aware of this, that we don't have a housing shortage. If anything, we have a very risky housing bubble. Because this narrative of a housing shortage and this narrative of rising prices is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we've created a bubble. And the only way to make sure that it doesn't crash to epic proportions is to bring in a bunch of people to support these prices. So they're suggesting in this article, I was actually very surprised to read the end of this and see how much of a conspiracy theorist they're maybe getting into there. They're saying that the whole reason Canada is bringing in all these people is because they know we have a housing bubble, and they need these people to catch it when it bursts.
Well, I think it's the housing bubble. It's also to help try and protect our currency, right? It's the same concept. Both those things. It's really to protect what we have. If we have people buying our stuff,
this is crazy times.
Then we can survive. It is a very sketchy time. It's the same thing. Like that's why they're saying like lower rates actually led to housing affordability issues, and the head of CMHC, Rami Bowers, is also saying, he's like, well, like we talked about on here before, I thought maybe they're going to extend the amortization of mortgages or reduce the like threshold to qualify. And he said, ultimately, all that's going to do is it's going to continue to drive unaffordability.
Yeah.
Because more people can qualify, prices are going to go higher. I know if they extend them to 75 years or 100 years, immediately the house prices.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Go up to match that.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, that's the other thing they mentioned in the articles. They say then the rising price hasn't been a shortage of supply. It hasn't been an excess of demand. It has been falsely created by cheap money. Anyway, really interesting take.
All that being said, what do you think would actually make a difference? To me, so like I said, the aspect is on apartment rentals. I think giving surplus land is important. The other flip side to immigration, I respect that they've been immigrating professionals and high net worth individuals, but they might need to also bring in a labor force. Because what's happening is Canada's turning into just all high net worth individuals, and it's making it very unaffordable for basically anyone working like a standardized job. If you don't own a business or have a ton of investments when you come here, it's almost impossible to get ahead.
Yeah. This is gonna get heavy. I believe that in order to really fix stuff, you have to actually blow it up and start again. And I don't think we would ever do that. So
blow the whole country up.
Just kind of hit some sort of significant reset. I hate using that term because it's been kind of co-opted or whatever. Where to begin? I think a couple things. I think one, we need a return of individuals to the job market that are out of the job market for a variety of reasons. Ooh, I got to tread really carefully here. I think a lot of people have been permitted or even incentivized to leave the labor force because they get paid to not work. And some for very, very, very valid reasons. I believe in social safety net and all these supports. Other people, I think, are opportunistic and make a calculated microeconomic decision. I could not work and make this, or I could work and make that. I'm going to not work and make this. So I believe, just in the same way that we may not have a housing shortage, I think we don't actually have a labor shortage in a lot of cases. We just have people who have taken themselves out of the labor market. Because once someone is put on a program, they are no longer part of the active labor force. And so our unemployment numbers drop. Because that is not an unemployed person, that is an unemployable person. And I think we need to look very hard at the definition we're using in Canada for a person that couldn't be gainfully employed and why they aren't motivated to stay in the job market. That's one issue I think we have. I think another issue we have here is that, man, I'm going to sound like a traditional old person. The numbers you reference about the number of people per household and how housing starts are outpacing household formations and all of these things, it's becoming a bit of a skewed measure because we are making it so expensive for people to start families that we have less people forming families, coupling up, starting their lives. And when you change that dynamic, I think you shift markets. So say two people form a relationship and they purchase a home together. They have more buying power, but they also only take up one home. When you have people that just aren't coupling up at nearly the pace or volume that they once did, that's two people out there who need two homes. And I know that sounds like a dumb simplification, but there's something going on there where people are single longer and later.
Less people are getting together?
I do. I also think when they are together, they don't stay together. And it is financially challenging for them to have children. And so our population is not growing naturally. And I think there's something there that we need to look at. But I think that's also happening all throughout the Western world. And I don't really know what the solution is. I
think that's happening all over the world. I don't know that that's just necessarily a Western world thing, but it's also, I think, the culture now to like, even if you're a couple and you stay together, that you're constantly upgrading and you're holding on to property. Like everyone's like, oh, like they expect by the time they're 30 to be 2 or 3 houses deep in their dream home and own 2 rentals. Like everyone's like, yeah, I don't sell my last house. I just rent it and then I buy another.
Yeah. But I do think we.
Do you think it's actually a higher ratio though of people not staying together?
I mean, statistically, yeah.
I guess statistically, people aren't staying together as much. That I agree with. But you think there's actually more singles?
Oh yeah.
Like everybody I know is in a relationship.
Yeah. No, I think people are definitely single longer. I don't know on a long enough timeline. I don't know how to measure that, like what it would look like, but I do see that. And then you have
the
like
ratios of people just living at home. Then like there's also on the flip side, on the opposite of that, you have like a way higher number of people that still live at home.
I think also just like the risk of one person taking on so much debt, whereas when you have a partner, you mitigate that risk to some degree, especially if you're responsible with it. And I'm not saying that in a knock. I'm not saying someone's just, I'm just going to get in a relationship. Then, that's a solution to all my problems. I'm just saying, like, we have created this challenging situation for young people who, takes longer for them to graduate. They're hemorrhaging debt by the time they do. They're really struggling to start their careers. How do you do that while also maybe think about family formation and partnerships and building a household and doing all these things? And then you're hearing like, oh my gosh, and you've got to buy real estate. Like, okay, I'll roll the dice and I'll spend all my net worth every dime I've got to buy real estate and probably still need chip in from mom and dad. And I just think there would be something to be said for if we could find a way that, I don't know, people maybe, I don't know where I'm going with this. I've lost the plot here a bit, but I'm trying to get at something that
I'm going to add to what you're saying in some capacity. So, I went to a presentation by the chief economist of CIBC, Ben Tal. He was in Halifax there for a night. I think Ben Tal, actually, sorry. And he had basically a big presentation, obviously regarding the economy of Canada, but a predominant focus on immigration and housing because that's a big part of our economy here. And obviously, as a bank, that's where a lot of their debt is tied up. Um, and he kind of went through all the other stats and numbers, showed Atlantic Canada was doing very well, which is great. Um, but one thing that he mentioned and kind of how he summarized was the Canadian and North American mindset need to shift. Because when you look in European countries, you can be 35, married with a kid, and you rent an apartment.
Mhm.
And that is very normal.
Mhm.
In Canada, like
Mhm.
you were just alluding to, if you don't own a house by the time you're 30, it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
no, that's a great
what?
point. Yep.
And our mindset here, it's like you got to own a house, the white picket fence, all this crap,
Yeah, that's true.
and so everyone's like pushing and pushing and pushing to own housing, and it doesn't necessarily make sense. And we've just kind of made the idea that it's just this great investment because it's gone up a lot with all the new debt policies effectively in place, but that culture could easily change. When you look at a lot of European cities, for the big portion of the city, it's mid-rise housing, and it keeps the density up, and that's actually good to run a city. Whereas
Mhm.
North American cities have a very dense core, and
Mhm.
they have this suburban sprawl, which is terrible for the economy of a city.
Mhm.
And it ultimately leads to this pricing where it just gets insane as you come into the core because you're spread so far out, right? So, anyways, his basically the summarize his thing was we need to start shifting the culture where people are comfortable to rent for a longer period of time. Because the other aspect is like we just look at a condo. A $450,000 condo now costs about $3,000 a month between your mortgage payment, your taxes,
Yeah.
your condo fees, all that. That same condo probably rents for $2,000.
Yeah.
So like you're spending an extra $1,000 a month to take that on, and as time goes on, that gap's going to continue to grow.
Yeah. No, that
Right? Like
that
you look in
that's a great point.
Toronto,
Yeah.
it's it's the same concept. It's like you should be comfortable renting because why the heck are you completely financially burdening yourself to buy something? And again, there's other alternative investments that you can make that honestly will probably pay and do well for you over the course of your life.
Yeah, I guess like the counterpoint to that would be okay, yes, that may be the savvy and smart financial thing to do, but there is also something to be said for quality of life and saying, well, maybe I would like to raise my child with a backyard, and you can make fun of the picket fence all you want, but it's a pretty nice picket fence and it's a nice life. So
I mean, if
you
you
know,
can't afford it though,
yeah,
so if you have
yeah,
absolutely no money,
yeah.
you can raise them in your backyard and be completely dead broke your entire life. Like basically, your house poor as shit.
But
So I don't know.
this
Like
is like
it is a pretty nice life. That's like you want to fly private jets and have a yacht. So I mean, you
so
might
it's
as well. Like at what point do you stop? Right? It
totally, but I don't
continues
think you
up.
can liken owning a house to like, well, that should be as unattainable as flying a private jet and having a yacht. Like that sounds like a really good treatment for the symptoms, but not a cure for the illness, right? Oh,
Well, no, but it's a
the
grotesque example to
yeah.
make a point, but real. Like I think this is the same concept. It's like if people just wanted a house, well, then you can get comfortable and you can drive 30 minutes to buy a
Well,
house, right,
yeah,
or 40
that's
minutes to
the
go
other
buy a
thing.
house.
That's the other thing. I think
Right? You
people,
can't expect to have a
yeah,
house inside the neighborhood that's better than the one that your parents grew up in, that they
yeah,
spent their whole life to establish and get. And then
yeah,
you're like, I'm only going to buy on the peninsula, let's say for it to be specific to Halifax. And it's like people spend their whole life and never get the opportunity to buy on
yeah.
there. And there's this mindset now that you should be able to just roll on and get it. And then when you can't, you're like, this is insanity. This
Also,
is the worst thing ever.
yeah. Also, I mean, my parents when they bought in 1984, the area that they bought in, people were like, "You want to live way out there?" And now it's an area that people can't move into. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I'd love to be in that area, but it's just not really feasible." And it's considered like very much in town. So we need a little bit of to change that mindset of maybe I'm going to a different community. Maybe I'm, you know,
Hmm.
I think some of that is also savviness because people are so concerned with their job status and their income on paper. They don't look at the cost of living of living in that city, right?
Yeah.
You could probably make a case where you could be a barista in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, and have a higher like disposable income than being a young CPA in Halifax,
Guaranteed.
right?
Guaranteed. I
So
guarantee that's you probably make more as a barista in Halifax than you would as a CPA in Halifax, and you probably still be in a better position.
but I just mean when you count for like, all right, what's the difference in my rent that I'm paying? What's the difference in
Yeah.
my even cost of commuting when I'm like living in a town that I can walk around versus I have to drive and all of these things, But I don't know if that there's either not the savviness to make those calculations, or to your point, it is this pressure of like, no, I want this job in this city and I want to do that. And we've sort of
I think it's that.
stigmatized things in the same way we stigmatized working in the trades for all those years. And now tradespeople are crushing it and we really need more tradespeople. And we're trying to tell people you should go into trades and be like, well, no, I should get an engineering degree or a finance degree or blah, blah. Like, I don't know, man. There's a great meme that goes around there where like this, there are these two people. There's like, Carl, did this degree and has this amount of debt and thinks they're smarter than people in the trades. It's like, and then Kevin over here, got paid for his apprenticeship, makes $90,000 a year to be an electrician, and just disconnected Carl's power, right? Like,
Yeah, I saw that.
it's a pretty great one.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's a lot of pressures, and this is where I always bitch about social media and stuff, where I think today's generation is under so much pressure from their families and parents, their friends, and then the actual social media that you see around them, and everything is just created out to be this big giant fantasy that it's impossible to try and keep up. Again, I think back to my parents, they bought outside of the main cities to start. Their first home, they bought outside of the main cities because they're like, we want a house, but we can't afford to be buying in somewhere in a city in Ontario. So
Yeah.
you start there and you work your way in, and there's
Yeah.
tons of options to do that.
And again, not to come back on, and people are going to think it's so weird that I put the role of like relationship and family formation as part of this discussion. But if you look at these people who are immigrating here, part of the reason they have the strength and confidence and the willingness to do this is because they come with their family, right? And it's easy for us to say, oh, just move to these secondary markets. Man, as a single person, that would be very difficult. But if you were in like a good, healthy relationship, like that's your partner, like you're building a future together, it would be easy to do some of these things, take some of these risks with a partner.
I disagree heavily.
Oh,
There's
okay,
a shit
okay.
ton of immigrants that come here without any family. No
That's true.
way.
That's true.
There's lots
Yeah,
that come here
good
with
point,
family.
good point.
But I know so many that are coming here by themselves.
point.
I'm like, that's even
Yeah.
scarier.
I
I
just-
think they come from a different culture. I think North
Yeah.
American culture is comfort and success and all this crap, but they come from a place where it's like, if you don't hustle and you don't grind and you don't get comfortable with discomfort, you're going to get eaten up and swallowed and you're going to have no opportunity, because in those countries you're forced to have to push through. Whereas here, everyone, especially like, you just get used to it. The second you go to school and you meet everyone else, you're like, he's got this, they got this, they got that. Then you get the internet and you're like, oh crap, like then everybody has everything amazing. And so there's just this constant perception. You're only being fed the best things, right? Social media presses you with only the greatest things. People don't share their hardships or their issues. They only share their wins. So when you go on social media, there's 1,000 people you follow sharing their wins every day, then you're seeing that. But I agree that there's some immigrants that come here with their family, but I bet you on average, they're not coming with their whole family. There's always like a couple sisters left behind. There's always a couple parents left behind. And there are so many, I would say from India especially, so many single guys that come from India that are like, I always ask them because I'm like, where are you from? Because I kind of a loaded question, but I want to know their story because I'm so impressed by the fact that they can leave everything they know in pursuit of a better life. And a lot of times they're sending money home to help support their families. And they're like, yeah, man, I'm here by myself. Like, I don't know anybody. And like, I live in like, I rent a room in a shitty place outside of town and I'm saving every dollar. And I sold like the guys with like 5 of them buying a house together to get on the ladder. And then they're able to pull out a bit of equity and then they each go do their own thing. North American culture is just not that. Like if I have someone here that grew up here and all that, they're not asking or making those relationships. Like you said, they're asking mommy and daddy, which is fine if it works, but if it doesn't work,
it's
not there.
I think the last thing, and we got to wrap this up here, but it ties into all of this. We talked about narrative. I think it's so funny that a big part of the Bank of Canada's tactics are just threatening rate increases. There's the actual, I would say like they have one tool, and that's manipulating the overnight rate. But they actually have 2 tools. The other one is manipulating perception of what they might do next, right? 100%. So it's not only that they're like, look, all they said is, I think we're going to take a pause. And then just them saying that made the market run a little bit. And now they did one rate increase and they say, we might do another. So they get basically 2 impacts for the price of one. If the media is effectively controlled anyway, which let's be honest, it kind of is. I just don't know why they just don't like plant all these stories that, oh, house prices are going down. House prices are going down. House prices are going down. Everyone should really sell for less. Everyone should just save all their money. Even like if we already
like all the news, every news article out there is negative for the most part. There's very few positive news articles.
They're positive. The negativity though,
and you click it,
the negativity is houses are so expensive. If they just send out something like, man, Houses are dirt cheap now. Everything's going down. Did you hear? People be like, "Oh, that must be true. That must be true."
Well,
I think they need to.
They're cheap. People are going to want to buy.
I think they need to. I think they need to sow some fear in people because people still aren't getting it. People are still overspending. I think they need to sow more fear about a pending, recessionary correction.
I think we need to do old school politics, which is like Trudeau gets up and he's like, this is an emergency announcement. You guys all need to stop spending. You got to chill. Because I think they tried to get there and like, oh, this worked. And then they, like you said, they said, all right, we're going to freeze it for a minute. We think the population understands that we were going through some craziness. Let's just all relax on chasing our dream for a second here and like let the economy stabilize. And then everyone's like, no, screw that. I see an opportunity to buy. I'm going.
Yeah. It's the same way.
I think they need to come out, but they never formally say it. That's what like you said. I agree with you. They're just threatening the rate hikes to try and scare everyone to chill out. And so like, we could have done 15 basis points, but that wouldn't have been enough. They would have realized that we weren't really doing anything.
Yeah.
We're going to do the minimum, which is a quarter, to try and instill the idea of fear into people.
Yeah.
Because they just won't chill out. People are not getting off their.
Well, it's because there's the other things like, does the government really want you to not spend? Do they really want that? Because that is how they get all of their money, is if you spend. So the government's like, oh, we kind of want you to not spend, but like, do we want you to not spend? Right? Like that's like, do the municipalities really want cheaper housing when their entire revenue is housing? It's their entire source of income. And they want to continue to buy these things that no one asked them for. Right? So I don't know that they really want it to stop. They say they do, but they're addicted to it, man. The government is addicted to expensive housing, which again comes back to that theory that the real reason we're bringing all these people in is because the government now knows that we have an inflated real estate market and it could burst. So we better bring in a bunch of people to prevent it from bursting. I don't necessarily believe that's the case, but it's an interesting argument when you start to piece together all these things that the government needs and wants and exists off of expensive real estate prices at every level, municipal, provincial, and federal.
Agreed. Last thing I'm going to add to that, and it's from Ben Tal, someone much smarter than us that's done a lot of research and spent his whole life doing this. He suggested that outside of the solution being like we need to change our mindset because that's something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take 30, 50, it'll take a whole generation. He also suggested that he understands that municipalities rely so heavily on the incomes from property taxes and permitting and all that. He's like, the federal government should start to kick in to help reduce permitting fees and all those expenses. Because again, same thing. I went to a presentation with Phil Fraser from Killam, and he suggested that like 30% of his direct costs, we mentioned on here, 30% of his direct costs was like permitting and all the expenses associated with the municipality and taxes. And so there was a suggestion that removing HST, federal government subsidizing permitting costs, so the municipality still makes the money. It's going towards something that is of value, but then it comes directly off the price of the housing. Would be great things. And again, he deals with BOC and the government of Canada, so he was alluding to it, and there's expected to be some big changes in the latter half of this year. So maybe we might see something like that or a new program get released that allows for that to happen. Yeah.
Right on. Well, I think we covered a lot here today, more than maybe expected, and we took some tangents there. As always, if you got anything from this, we really appreciate you following, and sharing the content. We saw a couple of people share our last episode on the psychology of real estate. I appreciate you. We appreciate you sharing that to your story and stuff like that. So thanks for listening. Thanks so much for watching the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. Don't forget to subscribe. But also check us out on Instagram and TikTok. You can find all the links below. Thanks again for checking us out.
Broke, I had rich habits. When I was broke, I had rich habits.